Okay, so at the start of the web, we had, we just had tags. And you would build your pages out of all of these tags. And some tags look differently to others, and there was no real reason for that. And since then, we've had this process of trying to explain the magic behind how pages are built up, and then give that magic back to developers, so you can use that magic to build different things. So an example of that is the DOM explained the structure of pages. CSS explained why one heading was a different size to another, and you could use that to style things differently. But until recently, we couldn't really explain why an input element looked the way it did and behaved the way it did, and why a select element was completely different, had a different set of behaviors. Well, we have a new explanation for that. We've got web components, and the explanation for how all that works and what you can do with it and how Polymer works, that is going to pour forth from the face hole of our next speaker. It is Eric Bidelman. Big round of applause.
So I'm from the US, so I'm going to continue the trend. Woohoo! That's from my face hole. So a little bit about myself. My name's Eric Bidelman. I work on Polymer. I work on the Chrome team, on the developer relations team here at Google. You can follow me on Google+. You can follow me on Twitter. There's way too much stuff to talk about in 30 minutes with Polymer and web components, so feel free to stop by office hours, chat at me on these different channels. So for those who have heard of Polymer, you've probably come into the project, you've seen our website, right? And there's this really nice little explanation of what the heck Polymer is. And it says, Polymer is a new type of library for the web. It's built on top of web components, and it's designed to leverage the evolving web platform on modern browsers. And so that's cool. It's very inspirational. It's a good little intro to the project. If you actually look closer, right, you're going to see this little diagram all over the place. We overload this in a number of places to describe the different pieces of Polymer. It's a nice Lego block building of colors and stuff. And so when people start to investigate Polymer, they say, well, is it polyfills? And yeah, it's polyfills. Is it a framework? Yeah, it's a framework. Is it UI widgets for the web? Yeah, it's that too. We're working on that. It's also a set of monomers, right, that combine together to form a molecule for your science geek like me and go on Wikipedia last night. But to really understand what Polymer is, you actually have to take a step back in time to the early days of the web. In order to understand where we're going, you have to understand where we've been. So this is what the web looks like today. We'll transport ourselves back in time to an earlier day when the web looked like this, or at least Google.com in '98. And this is probably what your first web page looked like. You had a couple of elements to play with. You had things like the form tag. You had selects. You had dropdowns. You had list elements, radio buttons. And so the platform is pretty limiting what we could do, but we didn't really need anything more than that. Of course, since we're in the '90s, we have Clippy's second cousin, which is Selecty, and he's telling us that we're going to build a website today. Oh, thank you. So actually, Select is a really awesome element, and it's worth actually discussing this for a few minutes. With Select, right, you can put some options in this thing, and it just knows what to do with those options. It knows what to do with these children elements, and what you get out of it is some default UI. I don't have to touch CSS or do anything crazy. So that's really cool. This works by itself. It's sort of think of it as an early component for the web, and this is native to the platform. This is your classic example of running out of swag at a conference. Everything is, nothing's available except for that XXL t-shirt. But the point I want to make here is that we're configuring these elements not with a bunch of script, but with just a little bit of HTML, just plopping an attribute on these options, and you get different behavior, right? So these are now grayed out, and that XL, of course, is the only one that's available. And you can move attributes to the select element itself. So I can say size equals 4, and I can put the multiple attribute on this element, and it completely changes the way this element behaves. Now the users can select multiple items, right? And we no longer have a drop-down. We have this sort of multi-select widget, which is really cool. Again, just by changing some attributes on this element, it knows what to do with that. And you can put other stuff in this tag. It's smarter than you actually think, right? We can put the op grouped in, we give it a label, have some options in there, and instead of your common dropdown, you get a completely different UI again, which is really cool. So super versatile, if you think about it. And I haven't touched any code yet. I'm just declaring this stuff. Select doesn't take everything. It actually is very picky. It knows what it wants. Right? You can only put options. You can only put opt groups in there. If you try to jam an li in there, for instance, the parser is just going to throw that out, and it's not going to render that in my dropdown. If we're building components, we want that ability too, to sort of selectively choose what markup we want to deal with. Select is really great by itself. It has all this ability. I can configure it with attributes. Now, if you put it in a different context, such as a form, it takes on new responsibilities, it takes on new meaning. So now when it's in my form, right, somebody's going to select this, give it a couple of values, and that name attribute is going to be submitted along with the form. So this is really cool. We're composing now a bigger and bigger application based on these smaller components. And of course, it's got a slew of properties and methods that it has on its DOM interface. And I apologize if that's very small and you can't really see it. SelectIndex, for instance, is a property on this DOM interface that doesn't really make sense as an HTML attribute, but it totally makes sense in JavaScript. I want to be able to get at the option that's selected. And Selecti also fires events, right? When something interesting happens, I get DOM events for this. So select is probably way more useful than you ever thought. Let's flash forward today and see where we are. Quick gut check. A tab component is sort of the quintessential component for the web these days. So where are we with this? What do we have to do in order to build a tab component on the web? Well, when we first started off, it looks something like this, right? There's a little bit of markup. We're overloading ULs, we're overloading LIs, and just at the bottom there, we call a little bit of script to activate this thing and get it going. And over the years, we've sort of added on more and more in JavaScript, less and less markup, and now we're at the point where a lot of these frameworks are just jamming in gobs and gobs of JavaScript. And that's really because the platform itself has lacked the expressiveness that we needed to it as we've evolved. The platform hasn't evolved with us, unfortunately, and so we're helping and try to change that. So this is what people ended up doing, right? Let's pile on the JavaScript. Let's pile on loads and loads of JavaScript. And ultimately, there's something wrong about this picture. The story is no brighter on the other side of the coin, right? So the markup is equally as atrocious as where we've sort of moved to in the script world. This is Gmail's source. If you open up the dev tools, at least the markup side, I have no idea what's going on here. This is not maintainable at all. I know they've done this on purpose, but as a developer, right, this is actually how we build web apps. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare from the script side and the markup side. What? What? Nobody likes this. So we've moved really far away from where we started, from the select, the declarative nature of HTML, what the web is good at, and now we're a sad panda in the corner with a small balloon instead of the large balloons. I don't know why I chose balloons here. I think it's just because I feel very deflated when I think about all this stuff. But it makes me sad. We can do much, much better. So what if markup was meaningful again? If you take the Gmail chat example, for instance, bump this up just a little bit. If you take the Gmail chat example, and you can imagine a world in the case of web components where you're declaring everything, and it's very descriptive. You know exactly what's going on in this web application. So I have a Hangouts module element that I've created. Within that, there's components such as a Hangout chat. I know who it's from. It's from Paul and Eddie, just by an HTML attribute. This is how you configure this tag. Their profile ID. Inside of that, there's a discussion going on there, and inside of that, there's Hangout messages, each describing sort of each individual chat message. So I have a prototype with that. I can talk to Paul Irish. He's loving the web components thing. Hey, man. And so everything is completely self-contained because it's all a web component. It's all using Shadow DOM. I can chat with Larry, too. He's not going to say much back to me. And so that's really awesome because I know exactly what's going on in this picture. I don't have to guess. And that's because we can get back to a platform that actually makes sense again. And so that's the universe, at least we conceptually feel is relevant on the Polymer team. We want to get back to that sort of declarative nature of the web and what it was good at, and reuse HTML and DOM like its first-class citizens again. So let's jump into Polymer. Quick spoiler alert, standards are at the bottom of all this stuff. So everything I'm going to talk about today, and I won't take a deep dive into the standards, but it's all based on 4 WC3 specifications. So we have templates, being able to define a section of DOM to be inert and able to stamp that out for later use. That's the template tag. HTML imports, so bundling up CSS, JavaScript, and HTML in a single unit and delivering that to another application. That's great if we want to have a set of components and deliver that to some end user. Custom elements, right? The bread and butter. Being able to define a new tag in HTML is super important. Teach the browser sort of new tricks. Hangout module, Hangout message, etc. And Shadow DOM is sort of the bedrock of all this. And you don't have to use it, but you can totally use it if you want things like encapsulation. So for the first time ever, we have the ability to encapsulate markup, encapsulate DOM, and encapsulate styles. So styles from your page that's embedding you, they don't bleed in, and your styles don't bleed out to the outside world. And that's super important. You can see by this, this chart here that we have a lot of implementation going on in Chrome, whether it's in stable or behind a flag. Firefox is gung-ho about all this. There's open bugs for all these specifications. Opera gets some of these for free with their move to Blink. And I just added Safari, who is going to enable, as of today, the template element. So a lot of products on the native front. Yeah, Seth likes it. A lot of progress on the native front with all of this stuff. And that's super exciting. But what is Polymer? So I sort of alluded to this diagram before. Let's jump into it just a little bit. The first is it is a set of polyfills. So we want to enable web developers to use this stuff today. It's really exciting stuff. It's going to change the way we do web development. We want you guys to play with it and give us feedback on all the specs. So the red part of this diagram are those polyfills, things like pointer events and shadow DOM and custom elements. That part is really cool because that actually goes away over time as the browsers implement these native APIs, right? So that part kind of dwindles to nothing. And the rest of Polymer sort of lives on, gets faster, gets better because it's using the native stuff. The sugaring layer, the yellow layer of Polymer, that middle section, is sort of our opinionated way to use all of these APIs and specifications together. You can use shadow DOM by itself. You can use HTML imports by itself and all these different specs by themselves. But we want to sort of help developers learn how to use them together in a really coherent way. And we also provide things like data binding and some other conveniences in this layer. Ultimately, we want to make your life more productive as a web developer. And the last piece, probably the most work in progress at this point, is the UI components, the green layer at the very top. So again, everything below this uses the core, it uses the platform polyfills. And we want to give you the ability to just drop a component on your page, a UI component that does the right things, it's responsive by default, it's 60 FPS, and it's using this underlying stack. So philosophy and goals. We keep it simple on the team. The first, and probably the most core fundamental aspect of the project and web components is everything is an element. We think that's awesome. We think HTML should be a first-class citizen again to the web. We think it's cool. And DOM feels actually really good to work with again. Unless you start to play with this stuff, it actually makes a lot of sense again. You don't have to write tons of code. Eliminate boilerplate. We want to, make your life more productive as a web developer. And so we want to remove, even in 2013, it's hard to be a web developer. It's very tedious. You have to remember things like touch events, pointer events, and all this other stuff. We want to remove all that. The last piece is to utilize the modern web platform. So if you have a hand on the steering wheel, you have a hand on the gear shifter, but you always have your eye sort of looking backwards, you can never really progress the platform forward and really show developers and the web what can be done. So we're only supporting the latest version of modern browsers. Turns out it's also very hard to polyfill things like shadow DOM for old IE. So let's talk about elements. We're going to go up and talk about that top layer of the stack. And the mantra here, if you remember, is that everything is an element. Everything is an element. So what do we mean by everything is an element? Well, this is one example. If Ajax was just part of the browser today, you would probably use it as an element. You probably wouldn't write a lot of JavaScript code. And so that's exactly the approach we've taken with the Polymer Ajax tag. The way you configure this tag is you give it a URL, right? Just an HTML attribute, very akin to the select element. You're configuring this element using attributes. It's all declarative. And then you're passing in a parameters attribute as well, with some additional parameters for that URL. And so instead of writing a bunch of XHR code every time I start an app, I'm just basically dropping this on my page, and it knows exactly what to do with that. And I'm configuring it from the outside via parameters, attributes. And I wire up a little bit of JavaScript. Just like the select element fires a change event when somebody selects something new, this element is going to fire a Polymer response event. And then I can subscribe to that, fetch this element from the DOM, subscribe to that, and just use the same techniques I'm used to, JSON parse the response from this JSON feed. This element has also an API, just like in the case of select. It has API methods I can call on its DOM interface. So there's this go method that I can call. And so this feels really good because I can reuse this each and every time I need Ajax in my application. Everything is an element. Thinking about layout using nothing but elements. So I don't know how many people have tried to use CSS Flexbox, but it's pretty painful. It's a great, this one guy. It's an awesome CSS feature, right? We've needed this for a long time. But it's still very intricate, and you have to know a lot of things about it. So if you remember for the case of select, right? Select was able to rearrange its children, give me some default UI without much work at all. On the approach in the Polymer team, what we've taken is let's make a Polymer Flex layout tag. And inside of it, its children just know to be Flex children. And so now I can configure this tag with attributes. So I can change vertical. I can just remove that attribute. And the element just knows what to do with its children and, of course, default back to a row representation. I can toggle the flex attribute on its children elements. And of course, it'll do the right thing. So it takes a lot of the burden out of knowing some of these new technologies under the hood. I can literally just have this thing do what it's supposed to do, which is arrange my page in a certain way. It's kind of conceptually interesting to think about elements that actually don't render anything. So Ajax, right, it's not rendering something. It's a utility element. It's doing something on the page. Same with the layout. It's doing something on the page. It's not actually showing me stuff. And we've been playing around with a lot of these I call them non-visual utility elements, things like layout for CSS grid and flexbox. We have a media query element that just handles doing media queries and firing events for that. So you just drop this in and reuse this, and you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Tags for dealing with a single-page application or shared state. Polymer local storage is actually pretty cool. So if you tie this up to another element, you get some change events, you pass some data using data binding to it, and I'll show you an example of that. And you persist data to local storage. You don't have to worry about hooking that up yourself. And then other things like Polymer signals, being able to broadcast messages to different components on the page or to the broader page. So conceptually, it's a little bit weird to drop this stuff on your page and it doesn't render any UI. It just, for instance, reads a file. What? A tag that reads a file? It's crazy. But once you get into the Polymer core, it starts to really, really make sense. And on top of that, we have a set of UI elements that we're working on. So this is what people think about when they think of components, right? The UI that you plop on your page. And your usual suspects apply here. We have things like a Polymer UI card. And basically what you do is you drop this on your page, and you get things like swiping functionality for free with touch events and pointer events. It's pretty nice. We have a sidebar menu item. So you just drop this markup on your page, and you get a usual sort of site navigation with a little thing that follows you, and it's got animations. It's all 60 FPS. But the really cool thing about this is it's just a bunch of markup, right? So I'm not writing any code to actually reuse this element. I'm just declaring a Polymer UI side menu on my page. It's got attributes like selected that I configure it with, labels, so we're using parts of the platform already. And inside of it, it knows what to do with its children, and it expects a certain type of children. It expects Polymer UI submenu item, and so that's what's rendering all this. Just a bunch of tags, so it's really easy as a developer to know what's going on here and to maintain and to use. It's important to note that web components really lend themselves very nicely to composability and reusability. So we're actually using, for a lot of the UI elements that we're creating, we're using these utility elements under the hood. So for instance, Polymer Selector is this sort of selecting widget that manages state and selecting those menu items. And so we're reusing stuff. We don't have to reinvent the wheel each and every time we start a new app. We can just compose an app out of components. So this is the world we're creating, we hope is really exciting for developers. This is the universe as I see it. This is actually, the video I played at the beginning is a Polymer application. It's written by John McCutcheon on the Dart team. He used the Polymer Dart port. And this is pretty cool because I absolutely know zero about WebGL, but I do know HTML very well. And so he created a bunch of custom elements for working with a 3D scene. And so this is just wrapping his WebGL library. You can see I can change the earth just by changing an attribute on this element. I can scroll up and change the texture of the sun. And just by changing a source attribute to a new URL, WebGL is updating that texture. We'll make it the, web components are the center of our solar system. So that's really cool, because I don't know anything about WebGL, but I know a ton about HTML, and I can read exactly what's going on. Each one of these tags knows what to do with its children and render that scene in a certain way. So let's talk about how you actually build a Polymer element or web component. This is the yellow layer in the center. This is the sugaring layer, convenience APIs. The goal here is to eliminate boilerplate. We want to make it really easy for you to develop web components. So Polymer has a number of features. The moral of the story here, I'll just play through the first couple, is that we want to make things super declarative. If I haven't made that clear right now, we want things to be declarative. We think it's very powerful to do that again. So instead of writing a bunch of code to register an element in the browser, you basically declare a Polymer element. It's a declarative form. To extend an element, use the extends attribute on your element to extend another component. We have things like data binding, right? Your typical double mustache syntax. If I want to data bind this inputs value, I'll just set up a property and data bind it. We have declarative events. So when this on-event name, in this case a click, happens, when it's fired, this property on your element is going to be called. And then we have a bunch of other stuff, things like property observation, reacting to state. When this property changes, do this. Give me this callback. The last one, pointer events and pointers, is pretty cool, right? This is a really evolving, awesome specification that sort of unifies input on the web. And you get this for free. If you're building a Polymer element, you don't have to worry about touch. It's just built into the model. Goal here, again, is to be declarative and write less code. And what I mean by write less code is actually, now we're in the platform layer, the sort of the core or the polyfill layer. So if you wanted to just use the specifications by themselves to create an element, you would actually write this each and every time. This is the template tag. Let me see if I can zoom in just a tad. So I have my markup using the template tag, the inert section of markup that I'm going to stamp out for each instance of the element that's created. Then what I do is I write a little script. I write a prototype. God knows writing prototypes are crazy. I have a created callback. This is all part of the custom elements API. Creating shadow DOM out of the template that I'm just creating. And then I call document.register. So there's a lot of stuff going on just to register a simple tag that does nothing other than render an input. So that's pretty crazy. We think we can do better. And so that's where Polymer Element comes in. What's cool about Polymer Element is that we've created a custom element that allows you to create custom elements, which is crazy. But it's using, again, the document.register under the hood. So you declare your Polymer element. You give it the name of the tag you're going to create. Maybe give it a constructor if people want to call you using the new operator in JavaScript. And then inside of the Polymer element, you just drop your markup using the template element, which is one of those specifications. So this one's pretty simple. It just has a style sheet in it that colors all inputs red within my shadow DOM. And so it's shadow DOM that Polymer is going to create out of this. So we're not going to bleed styles out. It's not going to color all inputs orange. But this is all you have to do. And then as soon as the browser in Polymer processes this, people at the bottom here, users of your element, can declare it on their page just as a normal DOM element. They can use DOM to create it using create element, or they can use the new operator as well. But at some point, you're probably going to want to define an API. So just as in the case of select, right, it had properties, it had methods, it had events that it fires. We'll take our example that we had before, which is that silly input, and we'll just kill this no script attribute that I have on top here. So when we kill that, we can inline a little script tag that calls the Polymer Constructor and pass it the name of the tag that we're going to create. So right now, it's not doing much, but we're going to add to this. The second parameter, second argument to Polymer Constructor is a set of properties and methods that your element defines. So if I use the console, for instance, the dev tools, and query this element in the DOM, you would get a length property and you would get a ready method. This is a cool little Polymer feature. I'm just basically grabbing my internal input from this tag, using the this dot dollar sign dot, and then referencing the ID of that element. So it's just kind of a convenience thing to get at the internals of the guts of your element. And that's all it takes. We're just defining these properties and methods, and they get added to the prototype of your element. I really want to remind folks that web components don't change the way your workflow for developing web apps. So if you want to do things like reference an external style sheet, you can totally do that. If you want to reference a script, you can totally do that. If you want to use CoffeeScript, if you want to use Sass, all is fair game in this world of web components. Ultimately, what changes is your concept of actually building apps. You're composing web applications based on smaller chunks that are all compartmentalized. This is also great, by the way, for CSP. Give a shout out to Chrome Apps, which is a strong CSP environment. So you can absolutely use Polymer in those environments as well. One of the core features of Polymer is being able to publish properties and do data binding. And this is super, super powerful. So we had the example of the my input before. We had just this input tag that's now I've inlined that style to color it orange. And I have two properties on this element. I have a type property, which is defaulted to text, and I have an orange property, which is defaulted, a color property, which is defaulted to orange. Instead, I can kill this sort of redundancy here and replace those hard-coded values with those properties using data binding and using the mustache. And so now whenever one of those changes, it's two-way data bound. And I can go crazy with this, right? I can set up a bunch of markup internal to my application and tie them together using data binding. So this is pretty cool. This is using Polymer local storage. So now every time someone types in this input, right, this value is going to change, and it's data bound to this Polymer local storage value, and I'm automatically going to persist data using just data binding and internal to my component. Very, very handy stuff. The other thing, if you remember from the select case, is that people could change the behavior of the element using attributes. And so in order to do that in Polymer, we have this attributes attribute, where you say, I want to publish the type property, and I want to publish the color property. And so then what people can do from the outside world when they use your element is, for instance, change the default of that color property using an attribute on the tag. So they're overriding my default of orange here to red. And so that's how you are able to customize elements by publishing these properties. Another example of using this stuff in action is to do something like responsive design by default. I can create a responsive layout element that basically handles all of the intricacies of dealing with responsive design. So in this example, I'm using Polymer Media Query Element that we've created, and basically using data binding to watch for changes on the media query. So when this query that I've passed has been set, this query matches is going to be true. So I'm data binding to that. And then I can stamp out a section of declarative markup using the template tag. So if isPhone is true and that responsive attribute is set, I can show this section of markup in my element. Otherwise, if it's false, I'm going to show this section of markup. So now we're sort of using dynamic markup, we're using data binding, we're using reusable elements, and it's all sort of just working internal to my web component. And people from the outside, all they have to do is just declare this sucker on their page. Responsive layout knows what to do with your content. It does the right thing based on the media queries in it. So that's super, super handy. So Polymer is many things, right? It's a set of polyfills to enable this stuff today. Again, it's landing in native browsers near you as we speak. On top of that, we have the core. We have the sugaring layer, which has data binding and all that declarative stuff, so you don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel and do all this customization over and over again when you're building a web component. And on top of that, we have the set of UI elements that we want to use and have you guys just drop those on your page, and everything just works using web components. The part at the top, the little blue part, is where you guys come in and build applications based on web components. You can use any part of the stack you want. If you just want to use the core foundational native APIs of the browser, you can use the polyfills. You can use our sugaring layer to make things more convenient. You can use just the elements if you don't want to write any code and just drop things on your page. That's totally, totally fine. So that's Polymer. I encourage you to check out our website at polymerproject.org to learn more. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of conceptual things that are changing sort of how we build web apps. As I was actually researching this topic and preparing for this deck, I looked up Wikipedia and actually looked up the definition of polymer. And polymer is a large molecule composed of many repeated subunits known as monomers. I don't know if you guys knew that. But I read this and I was like, whoa. If we replace a couple of words here, I actually read this as, a web app is a large collection of web components composed of many sub-elements known as custom elements. A web app is a large collection of web components composed of many sub-elements. So you're building components out of components, out of components, out of components. And those are known as custom elements. So I think that's really cool. I think when we start to compartmentalize things on the web and we can reuse them, we can share them, I think that becomes very powerful. That feels super good. So I hope you guys agree. Check out Polymer. Thank you for your time. This deck will be up at that URL. Again, feel free to follow me on the social channels. Thanks.